Biblical Times podcast. Writer and editor, Dr. Leora Ravid. Narration, David Green. Judah and Tamar Affair. The second episode out of 3. Episode 11. Hello to all our listeners, and thanks for joining us for the second episode dedicated to the story of Judah and Tamar, as it is told in chapter 38 of the book of Genesis. Let's briefly recall what we discussed in the previous episode. The story of Judah and Tamar puts the levirate law to the test of reality. This law was intended to provide a solution to a situation that can occur at any time and place where a married man passed away before children were born to him. Saddening as it is, in our times, the widow becomes a free woman who is allowed to remarry according to her wishes. However, the Bible is not referring to the Western and modern society in which we live, but rather to the reality and the ways of society and laws that existed in the ancient world. Since at that time the woman belonged to her husband, if he passed away, the hold over her was transferred to his family. If the widow was already a mother to children, she had fulfilled her duty to her husband, and her place in his family was secured. The purpose of the levirate law in chapter 25 of the book of Deuteronomy is to solve a situation where the deceased and his wife had not yet had children. This law permits one of the strictest prohibitions of incest in the book of Leviticus, and stipulates that the brother of the deceased must marry the widow. We discussed at length the many advantages of this revolutionary law in the previous episode, and after this brief reminder, we will turn to the story of Judah and Tamar. Tamar was about 11 years old when she married Judah's firstborn son. However, God killed him almost immediately after their marriage. According to the levirate law, Judah then married Tamar to his second son, Onan, who was also killed by God shortly after their marriage. Following the same law, Judah was supposed to marry her to his third son, Shelah. However, since Shelah was still a young child, Judah instructed Tamar to return to her father's house in a distant settlement called Timnah. There, she had to wait until her future husband reached marriageable age and marry her, and so it happened. Judah did not know that God had killed his 2 sons, and we will discuss the reason why he did so in the next episode. Years passed, and when Shelah reached marriageable age, the fear arose in Judah's heart that if he married Tamar to him, his fate would be like that of his 2 brothers. Therefore, he decided not to marry her to his son, nor to release his hold on her and allow her to marry a man other than Shelah. And here the situation becomes more complicated. Since Tamar was legally considered Shelah's wife, if she had slept with another man, she would have been considered an adulteress woman, and her sentence would have been execution. Yet, in reality, the marriage of Tamar and Shelah never materialized and was not going to materialize. Therefore, she became an anchor wife. An anchor wife is a woman who is both married and unmarried at the same time. She has a husband, but their marriage does not exist in the present and will not take place in the future. As we said, if she has sex with another man, she would be considered an adulteress and face the death penalty. For many years, Tamar was trapped in this miserable situation, unable to free herself from Judah's grasp. One day, she learned that Judah had arrived at Timnah, the village where she lived in her father's house. Tamar realized that if she did not act, she would remain desolate in her father's house for the rest of her life. Desperate to change her fate, she mustered up the courage and did something unthinkable. Tamar decided to seduce Judah and to get pregnant by him. Tamar knew that Judah would never have sex with her if he knew she was his daughter-in-law. To achieve her goal, she disguised herself as a prostitute, veiled her face, and set out to ambush him by the roadside. Her plan was successful, and she became pregnant. In doing so, she deliberately broke one of the strictest prohibitions in the Bible. 3 months passed, and Judah completed his business in Timnah and returned home. One day he was informed that Tamar had committed adultery and become pregnant by a stranger. Outraged, he rushed to the field and gathered dry twigs for a bonfire to burn his impudent daughter-in-law. When Tamar was brought to the place of execution, she revealed to Judah that she was pregnant by him. According to the law, Judah was obligated to execute her for the horrific act she had committed. But suddenly, the plot took a dramatic turn. Rather than throwing the criminal into the fire, Judah, who represents the biblical perspective, did something unexpected and proclaimed Tamar's righteousness. Quote, "She is more righteous than I, since I would not give her to my son Shelah, and he never slept with her again." In other words, instead of being punished for the crime she committed, Tamar received a prize. She returned to Judah's house and gave birth to the twins, Perez and Zerah. Mazel Tov. Our story raises crucial legal and moral questions. The first question is why Judah didn't execute Tamar as required by the law. Another question is what Tamar's legal status was after she returned to Judah's home and why her marriage to Shelah never materialized, even though she was formally his wife. Finally, why does a story involving such a serious sexual crime enter the Holy Book? And why does Judah, who expressed the position of the Bible, justify Tamar? We mistakenly treated Tamar and Judah as if they were two ordinary people living according to the social and legal norms that existed in Israel nearly 4,000 years ago. The truth is that these two were no ordinary heroes. Like Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, they were chosen heroes. They were a link in the chain of the patriarchs and matriarchs that led to King David. As we said, we will discuss the theological aspect of their story in the next episode. When we take into account that Judah admitted that Tamar was more righteous than him, it is clear that the Bible meant to convey through their story a moral precedent intended to create a just and equitable society. First, we will clarify Tamar's social and legal status after she returns to Judah's home, and then we will prove that through her story, the Bible sets a very high moral standard. First, the Bible emphasizes that Judah was unaware that the woman he slept with was, in fact, Tamar. However, once he discovered her identity, he adhered to the law that forbids a man from having sexual relations with his daughter-in-law. Secondly, in previous episodes, we emphasized that according to the levirate law, the obligation to marry the widow applies only if she remains childless. However, once Tamar became pregnant, the prohibition of incest applied to Shelah, and he was no longer allowed to have children with her. Due to this unique situation, neither Judah nor Shelah could marry Tamar or have relations with her. Consequently, her legal status remained unresolved, and she remained an anchor wife until her last day. However, now Tamar had a family, and she became the mother of delightful twins. The long years of loneliness living in her father's house and waiting for a husband who never arrived had finally come to an end. To emphasize Tamar's unique situation, it's important to note that she indirectly fulfilled the principle of the levirate law. Perez, her elder twin, was considered the son of who was Judah's firstborn. Indeed, Judah's dynasty continued through Perez, not through Shelah, who was born many years before him. So, if Perez was considered the son of then formally, Zerah, the younger twin, was considered the son of Onan. Consequently, Tamar fulfilled one of the objectives of the levirate law by establishing heirs for the two men to whom she was married, who passed away childless. Up to now, we have examined the story of Judah and Tamar from the social and legal perspectives that existed in Israel around 1700 BCE. Now we will prove that the Bible used their story to establish a just and moral society. In each episode of our podcast, we emphasize that the legal status of women in the Bible and the ancient world was inferior to that of men. This inequality still exists in Muslim countries, and until the end of World War II in 1945, the legal status of women in the United States, England, and Europe was also lower than that of men. Yet, despite a woman's inferiority, the Bible attributes supreme value to her right to have a family and bear children, which was her primary role. Without children, her existence was considered meaningless and unfulfilling, and this argument must be explained. The society that the Bible talks about was tribal and traditional, made up of families. Unlike today, the woman's entire life passed within the family to which he belonged. Until her wedding day, the girl lived in her father's house. From the day she got married, she moved to her husband's family home, as is evident from Tamar's story. To establish her position in her new family, the woman had to give birth to children and strengthen her husband's clan. Without children, she was just another mouth to feed. Therefore, it is not surprising that after the death of Tamar's two husbands, Judah sent her back to her father's house to wait there until Shelah reached marriageable age and married her. If Judah had kept his promise, Tamar would have returned to his house and given birth to a child with Shelah, and if, despite the upheavals she had undergone, her story would have ended well. However, Judah violated the levirate law and imprisoned Tamar in a marriage that would never be consummated. By doing so, he denied her the basic right to have a family, bear children, and establish her place in his family. To illustrate the Bible's recognition of women's rights, let us examine another law that, today, few realize how much it works in favor of the woman. In modern times, almost every second couple divorces, and often it is the wife who initiates the separation. However, divorce in the ancient world was a rare and one-sided phenomenon. The husband was entitled to divorce his wife, but she couldn't divorce him. The book of Deuteronomy appears to be the earliest source that provides evidence of a case when a man seeks to divorce his wife. First, he had to provide her with a certificate of divorce that released her from his ownership, allowing her to remarry. If her second husband also wanted to divorce her, he too was obliged to provide her with the same document, thus enabling her to marry a third time. Quote, "If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him, he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. And if after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house." Deuteronomy 24, 1-3. The certificate of divorce mentioned in the Bible did not involve the division of property as it does today. Its purpose was to allow the woman to start a new chapter in her life. We said that the story of Judah and Tamar was meant to convey a moral message, and now we must prove this claim. The Bible contains dozens of laws, all given by God. Among them are religious laws that deal with the religious and worship life of the people of Israel. Other laws intended to create a well-organized society and family. The prohibitions of incest and the levirate law belong to the second category. If we agree that the Bible was intended to create an orderly and moral society, then we must assume that a story in which the heroine received a reward after she committed a serious sexual crime is a moral story. Otherwise, the Bible would contradict itself or not include this story within it. This argument is reinforced by the words of Judah, who initially sought to burn Tamar, but ultimately admitted her righteousness and said, quote, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." The fact that Judah broke his promise to marry Tamar to his third son and refused to release his hold on her pushed Tamar to the edge. His behavior forced her to choose one of two options, either to comply with the incest prohibitions laws or to violate them. The fact that Tamar chose the second option and still she is the great winner proves the Bible's position. Meaningly, when the strictest incest prohibitions clash with a woman's right to rebuild her life, a woman's right prevails. Let us sharpen our claim. As we said before, Genesis presents Judah and Tamar as if they were two ordinary people, which is not true. Both belong to an ancient and privileged lineage, and we will talk about it in the next episode. But in real time, Judah and Tamar could not have known that God had chosen them to be the ancestors of King David and the priestly families in Israel. Yet through their story, the Bible established a clear moral position that says that what was forbidden to every person in Israel was forbidden to the privileged lineage of David's ancestors. They were bound by the same code of moral behavior. Before we part, we must mention that it would be difficult to record additional episodes without our listeners' support. Producing this podcast is particularly expensive due to the need to translate it from Hebrew, the original language of the Bible, and the need for assistance from various professionals. Those willing to support this unique project are welcome to visit our website and contribute through our Patreon page. Those interested in purchasing Dr. Ravid's book, Daily Life in Biblical Times, can do so through our podcast's website. The book examines the actions of biblical heroes, considering the social and legal norms that existed in their time, which obligated them to act in the way they did. Ravid's book contains translations of numerous puns and wordplays that offer additional insights into the stories, which are lost in the English translation. Please recommend our podcast to your friends and relatives, and until next time, goodbye and all the best.